Juneteenth, celebrating freedom, hard won and long delayed. It's finally getting its due. But going through these sources, it seems like there's pushback against this recognition. What's happening?
You're right, Juneteenth's at a crossroads. Opal Lee, the grandmother of Juneteenth, she's working hard to get a national Juneteenth museum built. Shows how much more awareness there is now, right, for this huge moment in American history. But then on the other hand, things are shifting politically, especially with Trump back in office and his stance on all those diversity, equity, and inclusion things. You know what I mean? It casts a shadow over Juneteenth's future.
Yeah, it's a weird mix, isn't it? Can you tell me more about how those DEI initiatives are being targeted? What are the worries people have, and how's that connected to Juneteenth?
Well, DEI initiatives, they're about promoting representation and inclusion, especially for groups that have been marginalized, in all sorts of areas, education, jobs, even cultural celebrations. The problem is people are pushing back. They're saying these initiatives are basically reverse discrimination, that they're favoring certain groups unfairly over others. They say it goes against the whole idea of meritocracy and that it's creating unnecessary divisions.
So how does this all tie back to Juneteenth?
It's tricky because at its heart, Juneteenth celebrates Black liberation. It's about recognizing the historical injustices that African Americans have faced. And some people who are against DEI, they see it as like too much focus on race, and they think that goes against the whole idea of a colorblind society.
Yeah, that's complicated, for sure. It's like this balancing act between acknowledging the past and wanting a future where race isn't such a big deal. But before we go too deep into the politics, let's go back to Opal Lee and all the amazing work she's doing.
Of course, Opal Lee's story is really inspiring. At 89, she walked all the way from Fort Worth, Texas to Washington, D.C., just to advocate for Juneteenth to be a federal holiday. She's really dedicated to making sure this part of history isn't forgotten.
And now she's spearheading this push for a national Juneteenth museum. What's the idea behind the museum? What do they hope to achieve?
They don't want it to just be a place with old stuff. They want it to be more than that, a lively place for learning, reflection, and celebration. They want to create an experience that truly brings the story of Juneteenth to life so visitors can grasp the history, the culture, and why it still matters today.
I bet it would be really powerful to be there in that space and feel all that history. But getting back to now, President Biden did make Juneteenth a federal holiday back in 2021. That seemed like a huge victory, but then, as you mentioned, there's this whole political tension around it.
It's a strange contrast, isn't it? It's a big deal to have that federal recognition. It means more people are aware of how important Juneteenth is. But at the same time, we've got these political ideas popping up that seem to go against what Juneteenth is all about.
And speaking of going against, one of the sources mentioned that former President Trump, who's not a fan of those DEI initiatives, tried to take credit for making Juneteenth a federal holiday during his 2020 campaign. Was he really trying to do that, or is there something else going on?
It's hard to know for sure what his intentions were. Some people say he was just trying to get black voters on his side, while others think he really did want to promote unity. But whatever his reason, it seems ironic to a lot of people, especially now with his stance on DEI.
It definitely makes you think about those political moves, especially when they don't seem to match up with what someone really believes. You mentioned that even corporations are feeling pressure to back off from celebrating cultural events. What's causing that?
It's a bunch of things. Some companies are scared of getting backlash from customers, maybe even boycotts if they're seen as too politically correct or woke. Others are worried about alienating employees who don't agree with those things. It's tough for businesses. They're trying to figure out how to deal with this polarization without hurting their image or their bottom line.
And even when companies have good intentions, they still face that fear of backlash. Makes you wonder if Juneteenth itself could be at risk now.
That's a valid concern. I don't think the holiday itself will be taken away, but there's a chance its message could get lost in all the debate about DEI.
So how do we protect Juneteenth from being co-opted or watered down, especially if its future as a federal holiday is shaky?
That's where people like Opal Lee become so important. Once it's built, the National Juneteenth Museum will be a constant reminder of the historical and cultural weight of the holiday. No matter what's going on politically, it's about having a place where the story of Juneteenth can be told truthfully without any political agendas or trying to change history.
One of the sources talks about this film called Block Party. They say it's one of the best Juneteenth-centric movies out there, and it's got some really famous black actors in it. But what's really interesting is that the producers are using it to support Opal Lee's vision for the museum in a really unique way. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. The producers Block Party are doing something special. They're letting people screen the film at theaters, community centers, even real block parties. What's cool is that every screening is also a fundraiser for the National Juneteenth Museum.
That's amazing. So by bringing people together to watch this movie, they're not just celebrating Juneteenth, they're actually helping to make sure the museum gets built.
You got it. It's a great way to get communities involved, spread awareness, and raise money for the museum. It really captures the spirit of Juneteenth, which has always been about community, resilience, and celebrating.
It's like they're blending entertainment, education, and activism in a way that really makes an impact. It's almost like a direct response to those who are trying to downplay how important Juneteenth is.
I think you're right. By giving a platform to the voices and stories that celebrate Juneteenth, they're making it harder for anyone who wants to erase or twist its meaning to succeed. And the more people celebrate it, the harder it will be to ignore or dismiss its importance.
It's like a movement driven by the people who understand and value what Juneteenth represents.
Exactly. And that's a force to be reckoned with. That energy, at the grassroots level is what makes this block party thing so cool. It's more than just watching a movie. It's like taking part in preserving Juneteenth's legacy. It's about communities coming together, sharing stories, making sure we don't forget.
You said earlier that the museum wants to be more than just a bunch of artifacts. What kind of experience do you think people will have when they go there?
I think it'll be really immersive, really get your thinking. Imagine walking through exhibits and suddenly you're back in 1865. You can feel what it was like when those enslaved people in Galveston, Texas finally found out they were free. I can picture interactive displays that bring those stories to life, showing how resilient people were and how rich their culture was.
It's wild to think that news traveled so slow back then. It took over 2 years for the news of emancipation to get to Texas after the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah, that delay says a lot about the systems that were in place, how deeply rooted slavery was. It makes Juneteenth even more powerful as a symbol of perseverance, like the human spirit, refusing to give up even when things were so bad.
And that's a message that goes beyond Juneteenth, right? It's about the fight for equality and justice that we're still dealing with today.
Absolutely. Juneteenth reminds us that the fight for freedom never really ends. We have to keep dismantling systems of oppression, challenging injustice, and pushing for a world where everyone is treated equally. And even though the holiday comes from the Black experience, its message, liberation and perseverance, it speaks to everyone, regardless of race.
So what does this all mean for our listeners? Why should someone care about Juneteenth if they're not Black or from Texas?
Juneteenth is an invitation to engage with this key part of American history, a part that still influences us today. It's a chance to think about our past, all the complicated parts, to acknowledge that the fight for racial justice is still going on, and to figure out how we can each help build a future that's more inclusive and fair for everyone.
It's about realizing that history isn't just something in a textbook. It's alive, and it shapes who we are and the world around us.
That's why things like the National Juneteenth Museum and these block party screenings are so vital. They make history feel real and engaging so people from all walks of life can connect with the story of Juneteenth on a personal level. They start conversations, help people understand each other better, and inspire them to take action.
It's interesting to think that while federal recognition of Juneteenth is a huge step, the real power comes from how communities embrace and celebrate it.
I totally agree. These grassroots efforts keep Juneteenth alive and relevant. They create spaces for dialogue, education, and reflection, making sure that Juneteenth legacy isn't forgotten no matter what's happening in politics.
And each time someone gets involved, whether it's going to a screening, donating to the museum, or just learning about Juneteenth, it has a ripple effect. It builds momentum that can lead to real, lasting change.
That's the beauty of movements that start from the ground up. They begin with people who are passionate and committed, and they grow into something bigger than anyone could have imagined. They show us that even when things are uncertain or there's resistance, we can create the world we want to see.
It's like a beacon of hope, a reminder that even when things feel tough or discouraging, there are always people out there working to make a difference. And that's worth celebrating, don't you think?
It absolutely is. And Juneteenth, with its spirit of resilience, celebration, and the constant pursuit of freedom, embodies that hope perfectly.
As we keep going through these sources, I keep coming back to this idea of personal responsibility. If the government's recognition of a holiday can be uncertain, what responsibility do we have as individuals to keep these meaningful cultural events alive and celebrate them?
It makes you think, doesn't it? And I think Juneteenth itself gives us an answer. For over 150 years, it was mainly a community thing, mostly celebrated in Texas. But it held on, passed down through generations. People kept its meaning and importance alive through stories, get-togethers, and traditions.
It really shows the power of shared memory, how resilient cultural identity can be. Even without the government recognizing it, Juneteenth thrived because people knew how important it was and they chose to keep it alive.
And that's a lesson for all of us. Preserving our heritage isn't just up to institutions or the government. It starts with each of us, taking ownership of the stories, the traditions, the values that matter to us.
It's about recognizing that what we do, even if it seems small, can be part of something much bigger, like those Black Party screenings, for example. Just by hosting or going to one of those events, people are directly helping to build the National Juneteenth Museum, a permanent place to make sure Juneteenth's legacy is never forgotten.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how we can make a real difference when we work together. And it shows that we don't have to wait for someone else to lead the way. We can all do our part to shape the culture, make sure stories like Juneteenth are told and celebrated.
So if you're feeling inspired, if you want to learn more about Juneteenth and how to get involved, what can you actually do?
Well, start by learning the history. There's so much information out there, online, in libraries. It'll give you a deeper understanding of where Juneteenth comes from and why it matters. Look for local events or groups in your area that are celebrating Juneteenth.
And if you want to really dive in, think about hosting a block party screening. You'll be supporting a great cause, and you'll be creating a space for people to connect, talk, and celebrate. Imagine getting your friends, family, neighbors together to watch the film, have some food, and really discuss what Juneteenth means.
It's such a great way to honor Juneteenth and help secure its future. And remember, even small things can make a difference. Sharing information about Juneteenth, supporting businesses owned by Black people, or just talking about racial justice.
It's about being aware, being proactive, using our voices and actions to lift up and amplify the stories that matter.
And that's what Juneteenth ultimately calls us to do. Remember the past, celebrate the present, and work towards a future where everyone has freedom and justice.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive into Juneteenth, I want to leave you with this. Even when things feel uncertain or there's opposition, the spirit of Juneteenth reminds us that progress is possible. It's a testament to the power of hope, resilience, and the unwavering pursuit of a more just and equitable world. So go out there, learn more, get involved, and let's continue to build upon the legacy of Juneteenth together.